Hello, I'm Grant from Maker's Vlog, and today I'm going to be taking you through the network that I set up. If you've seen a few videos ago, I have this project in mind to set up a mock-up of a small business infrastructure and have it built in worst case scenario, everything's really insecure and shit, and sort of show how you can build that up using free open source tools, and even in some cases just putting some policies and practices in place. Sounds really dull, but I think it's really interesting, and given that cybersecurity is something that can, if it's not done right on a small business, it can lead to the company going under effectively. A bad hack or a bad leak on a small company, even like a ransomware attack, something like that, can, it can really be damaging to a small business. So that was the idea behind this. If you want to see the full reasonings and all that, I'll put a link to the video in there. But I now have the infrastructure built. And before I do that, I have to say a quick thanks to Library. Library is a video platform. I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that. But it's a video platform, a bit like YouTube. All my videos are backed up onto there as well. And they had a thing going, like a funding thing for if you have an idea for a video or series of videos, they'll give you a bit of funding towards it. And I submitted this idea to it and it got funding, so it's helped me get the actual hardware for these, so that's really helpful. So I'll put a link to Library and my videos in there in the description, so cheers to them. So also these videos, this is going to be split into multiple different videos, I reckon, because I'm going to go through each server, each thing on this in this network, just to explain why I've got it and what it does. And I'm going to be doing it with the expectation of no knowledge on these topics. So if you work in IT, if you're a sysadmin already, a lot of this might be teaching you to suck eggs, but I really don't want. I'm going to really try to avoid any expectation of knowledge, because I don't want to use a term or say something and someone not know what I mean, because you can't know everything in IT. And in some cases, people maybe watching this aren't actually that IT literate. Maybe they just own a small business and they just want to get some tips and advice of processes that they can put in place. Because let's face it, not every small business has or needs a server room. And the processes and stuff like that are things that applies to any business. But let's get into it. So as you can see, I have two servers here, red and blue. Now, if anyone is in any way into IT or IT security, you might recognize red and blue, and you might know why I've called them that. In cybersecurity, there are two teams, is what they're called, red teamers and blue teamers. And a red teamer is what most people think of as cybersecurity. They're the attackers, or at least they simulate the attackers. They're the ones who actually try and pen test systems and try to attack them and find vulnerabilities in systems, programs, websites, everything. And whenever they find a flaw or vulnerability, they write it up in a report and then they submit that to whoever asked them to do that test in the first place. A blue teamer is on the defense side of things, and that's what I do. And they're the ones who generally get the report from the red teamers and say, this is how we got into your network. And then the blue teamers try and fix it. The blue teamer's job is also to try and make sure, that those holes aren't there in the first place, and to monitor and make sure that, if anything unusual is happening, that it's caught and spotted, and to put processes in place. There is a lot of different areas in blue teaming that you could go into. I'm sure red teaming is very much the same, but I don't know red teaming as well, or at least the structure of the job. So I've named these servers red and blue for red team and blue team. And on the red server, I have all of my essentially attacking things that I'm going to use to demonstrate the vulnerabilities in blue. And in blue, I have my actual mock-up network. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about what these are. So red and blue are physical servers, and I'll put a picture of what they actually look like here. And what I've done is I've installed a thing called VMware ESXi. Now, anyone who is in IT will know what that is, or at least will probably have heard of it. And it's a virtualization software. Now, what is virtualization? If you know what the virtualization is, you can skip ahead a bit. But if you remember in one of my other videos where I was talking about infrastructure basics and I was talking through different types of equipment, I'd mentioned switches and I'd said something along the lines about VLANs. And VLANs is the process of taking a switch that can maybe take, say it can take 64 computers plugged into it, and it allows all those 64 computers to talk to each other. VLAN allows you to virtually split that. So you take a physical machine and you virtually split it into two separate switches. It is how it acts effectively. So you have then two switches that are, say, can take 32 computers each. It's still one physical device, but as far as the switch is concerned, those networks are separated. A computer that's plugged into the first half of it can't talk to a computer that's in the other half. You're virtually making it smaller and separate. Same idea here. I have two physical servers and I'm using virtualization to split them down into smaller servers. Loads of different reasons why you would do this. Virtualization has been around for quite a while, and most network infrastructure will use it. Because if you think about it, I have here on red, I have 6 servers, effectively, 6 machines, operating systems running. Now, if I didn't use virtualization, I would have to have everything that these are running installed on just one server, one operating system. If you think of your computer that you're got in the house, I would need to have everything that I need installed on that one machine. Now, a couple of problems with that. One, if the operating system hiccups. Now, how many times have you been sitting at a computer and it's blue screened on you, or it's crashed, or it's frozen? If that happens in a network infrastructure, especially if you have everything installed on one server and that operating system decides to crash or freeze, everything that's on that server goes down. It's just down. And you have to go and try and fight with it and try and get it back up. That can cause a hell of a lot of downtime and a lot of problems. Whenever you have it split up like this, these are all running their own operating systems. They're all separate. So if, let's say, we have Mininet here, let's say it hiccups and it freezes and I need to restart it. Parrot, Kali, Ctfd, Lord of the Root, and Mr. Robot, all unaffected. They are fine. They don't care. They don't know anything about Mininet. They don't even, they don't know that they're on the same server as it. They don't care. So you've got that. You've got that ability to keep things separate that way. The second thing is space and money. So if you look here, you can see Guest OS, Ubuntu Linux, Debian, GNU Linux. And these two are actually two separate operating systems as well. They're just, two different packages of Linux. Parrot and Kali Linux are pen testing tools. Now, if I wanted to bundle all these together, they would have to be on the same operating system. So these two would actually have to be on a separate physical server running Debian. And even though I've got it separately here, you can see I've got Windows Server 2006, Ubuntu, and FreeBSD. Each of those would need their own server, so I'd need to bundle these two Windows servers onto a different machine, this Windows 10 onto a different machine, these two Ubuntu, different machine, and FreeBSD again onto a different machine. So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually 7, because that's 32 bits, so that's different again, that's a different operating system. So instead of me having 2 physical machines, I would need 6. And that's with me bundling and doing the bad practice of putting all these things onto one server where they will fit. So being able to virtualize and split this down, I just need 2 machines that has enough resources, so enough CPU, processing power and RAM and all that, which we can actually look at. If we go to here, wait for it to load. So it allows, it's cost effective, so it is. And if you're in any server room anywhere and you look at it, I can guarantee you that it will be running some form of virtualization in there. And so you can see here we have CPU, memory, and storage. And these servers are not that big. So they're not, these servers are very old. They're HP Pro Lions. So I have 2 processors in here with, I think 8 cores total. They've got 4 cores each. And 24 gig of RAM and 300 gigabyte storage. And, I'm not using that much of it, really. And that's 6 servers I've got here. Now, this is a bit of a misnomer because these are all Linux, and Linux is great for resources and stuff like that, but they're also not on, and even if I turned them on, they're not really doing anything at the minute. So bit of a false positive there, but it's not. It doesn't take much to run all of these machines on one thing. So that's virtualization, and that's what this is. As you can see, I'm running a free version. So that's what this is. It's virtually splitting these into different machines, and it's a pretty common practice. So the first thing I'm going to go through very briefly is red. Blue is the server that we're actually going to be mostly working on. Red, as I said, is just going to be my landing platform for doing attacks onto blue and showing why these vulnerabilities are so bad and why you need to do certain things. But this is also my wife and I have a couple of research projects that we're doing, and some of that will be done on here as well. That's what this mininet is. So I won't talk about mininet because it's, again, for a research project. It's for network virtualization. Parrot and Kali are both the same. Effectively, they're versions of Linux, but they're pen testing tools. Most people, if you're in cybersecurity or ever looked at cybersecurity or watched any hacking show, you'll probably have heard of Kali. Parrot is the same idea. It's just a different flavor. It's got different tools. It works a bit differently. I quite like it because it looks pretty. That's the only reason it's on here. So I have both Parrot and Kali, and those are the two machines that I'll be using to actually go into blue. Ctfd, this is a framework for capture the flag events. For those of you who don't know what capture the flag is, effectively you have a computer, a server, a machine that is intentionally vulnerable. There is a way to get into it and has a thing on it called a flag, usually a file with just a string of, almost like a random password that you'd see on your Wi-Fi, a whole big string of numbers and letters. And the objective is for you to hack into that machine and find out what that flag is. Ctfd is just, it runs a website effectively which manages what the flags are, so that whenever the person finds them, they can go onto that website, put it in, and say, hey, I've found this flag, and it goes, okay, cool, and then it assigns the relevant points to that person. It's like a little competition, a little hacking competition. And I'm in the processes of trying to put one together for someone else. And that's what these are, Lord of the Root and Mr. Robot. There is a ton of servers out there that you can go and you can download and try and attack and get the flags on, just for practice and hacking. I'll put a link to it. I think it's called VulnHub or something like that. I'll put a link to it in the description. And this is just two of those servers, and that's all they are. So that's it. That's all I have on red. Now, if we go over to blue, this is the important one, really. And what I'm actually going to do, I said there that I don't need to remote onto these from this console. We can do it a separate way, and I'm going to show you that now. Okay, so I had to swap screens. Just the recording software was being a little bit funky, so apologies. I won't be actually looking at the camera for this bit. I'm going to be looking this way, but yeah, I'm sure you'll live without me looking directly into your eyes for a bit. So hopefully you can see this okay. This is a bit of software called Remote Desktop Manager. It's free. And if anyone works in IT or anything like that, you'll know about Remote Desktop, or RDP as it's called. And it's essentially a way of just remotely accessing a computer. It's used a lot for servers and the like, so that you can, you don't actually have to go physically down to the server room to get onto a server. You can just administer it remotely. And this little application is just, it's just a way of like saving common computers that you're talking to a lot. Because otherwise the actual inbuilt remote desktop thing is like a pop-up window. You put in the server that you want to connect to, you put in your password, and you connect. If you have a lot of servers that you're managing, it can get annoying trying to remember them all, and then you save them as icons and stuff like that. It's a pain. Little managers like this can be quite handy. I think this can do a whole lot of other stuff, but I'm not too sure. At the top here, so you can see on the left hand side, hopefully you can see that. Let me see. Oh, you can't see my mouse. Let me just check that now. Okay, there we go. So you can see here on the left hand side, I have a list of connections, and this is just the names of the servers. You can see there I've got the Ctfd. It's not really part of the actual test network that we're doing. It's just I was working on it, and as I said, this is a handy thing to have. But the first one I want to talk about is DC01. Now, as I said before, these videos are no knowledge required. So if you know anything about IT, you maybe skip this bit, because I'm going to go in and explain what a DC is. For those that don't know, a DC is a domain controller, and that is essentially what controls your domain. Who knew? So in this case, we'll see here, I have created a fake business, a fake company called MakerVlog, and in that I need to be able to manage users and machines and servers and all that good stuff, and I need to be able to control what people are doing, who logs in, and all that. A DC, a domain controller, is where that's built. You would usually have more than one, because this is the thing that actually authenticates. Whenever you're in a company and you try and log on to a computer in a business, it will check your password against this server. This is a server that knows who you are, what your password is, all that good stuff. If you're in IT, get used to seeing that message. So it's the server that it controls all that stuff, but it also does a lot more. It's a very, very important server, which is why you usually have more than one. I only have one in this infrastructure because I'm not relying on this server. If anything goes down or breaks, it's not the end of the world. So I only have one, but in an actual company, you would have minimum two, probably more. It's a very, very important server. So as I said, it controls user information. It also does a thing called DNS, domain name services, and DHCP. Usually, sometimes you have a separate one, but this can do it all. DNS is what sorts out the IP addresses from the human readable. Now, that sounds really strange, but I'll show you it in a second. And DHCP is what gives you an IP address. So every computer on the network has an IP address, and it's like that computer's identifier. It if anything tries to send a communication to your computer, the IP address is what it sends the information to, and then all those various bits of equipment that I talked about in the other video, the switches, the routers, all that, that's what they use in order to send that communication. They go, okay, this is the IP address that it's going to, send it to there, it goes to the routers, the switches, and what have you, and they know where to send that information to. But you can't have two computers on the network with the same IP address, because it'll get confused. I'll go, which packet, which computer is this information going to, because I'm seeing 3 or 4 that have the same IP address. It won't actually get that far. Usually what happens is everything just breaks if you start having multiple IP addresses, and somehow a computer's managed to get multiple IP addresses. Things will just start breaking, and it is bedlam. A DHCP server, which again is usually on the DC, on the domain controller, but not always. You can separate them out. But the DHCP manages that. It controls who gets what IP address, and allows you to set up static IP addresses, which means that this machine always gets this IP address, or this machine always gets this IP address, or this machine always gets an IP address in this range. It either gets between 1 and 4. It gets a specific one, and that's important because this machine, because it does DNS, which again I'll talk about in a second. Your computer, so if you have a wee computer on the network and you go to Google, it needs to know how to get to this server. Your computer needs to know how to get there. So it's very important that this machine's IP address doesn't change, because it'll be something that's statically set. Someone will have came in and configured and said, okay, your DNS server is 10.0.1.1. Actually, that's wrong. It wouldn't be 1.1.101, we'll say. And in fact, this server, if we go in here, you will see potentially that it is set up to 10.0.1.202. And so whenever I'm setting up the networking of the other computers, or I'm setting it up to say, okay, this needs to be the standard, I'm telling it that this server's name or this server's IP address ends in 202. And it needs to not change, because if this changed, then everything else on the network that's trying to get to it will break because it can't find it because the IP address has changed. So it's important that some machines have static IP addresses. Now, a lot of information there at once. I apologize, but if you're not in IT, you don't. This is just an overview of what these things are, just so that if your IT guy comes in and says, "Oh yeah, you've got Fergal's in your DHCP server and it's up the left with the flux capacitor," you can sort out the bollocks from the real. Because let's face it, IT guys have a tend to, they can tend to throw jargon at you just to confuse you, which isn't a good thing. But hey ho, here we are. So, little thing here, see domain, and you can see there it's makervlog.local. That is the domain. So that is what my company's network is called. So if I had, say, an email address, it would be grant@makervlog. In this case, it's .local because it's an internal domain, but it would be .com, .co.uk, .net, whatever. And so that's where that is denoted from. And whenever you log on to a server, and check this next time you log on to a computer in a workplace, you might see a little name and then a backslash whenever you go to actually log in. You might see it might be human readable, it might be your job or your company / whatever, or it might be a series of numbers and letters depending on how big the company is. And that's the domain. And what you're doing whenever you sign in like that, you're saying to that computer, this is how I want you to check I am me. Because if you didn't have that information in there, if you just went and logged on with your username and your password and it didn't have that company name / which usually is it's automatically in there usually, but sometimes you have to put it in yourself. But whenever you have that chunk, if you don't have that little prefix there, the computer doesn't know who to check who you are with. Like, it gets your username and password and looks at it and goes, I don't know who this is, and I don't know where to go to find out who this is. So that little prefix, your company name / tells the computer, okay, you're part of this company, so I need to send it to your domain controller, the domain controller, for that company. And it will obviously have it in, unless you have multiple companies and they're called forests, and it's spread whole big terminology jargon. Don't worry about it. But generally, it goes, okay, I need to then send this to the domain controller for that company to authenticate you, and then that domain controller is actually what looks at you and goes, oh, okay, yes, I know who you are, and this is the correct password, and you are in fact allowed to log onto that machine. So go ahead. That's how it authenticates you, and that's why that little prefix is there. So for anyone actually who is potentially watching this in Northern Ireland, I don't think there's many of you, but for anyone who is, and if you happen to be part of Queens, you'll actually know that whenever you log on to the online portal, you have to do that little / They tell you that you need to put in the domain and then that little /, otherwise it won't authenticate you. And that's why, because without the little prefix with the domain, it doesn't know how to authenticate you. It doesn't know who to check who you are with. So that's the domain. Now, what this actually does, if we go into if we go into users and computers, this is usually what most IT guys and girls will spend most of their time in. Because if we go here, and you will see that this is a mess. Anyone who works in IT will recognize this as an absolute mess, and it's meant to be. As I said, I'm making this network absolutely worst case scenario. But you will see here, I'll just make that full screen. You will see here a list of names. Now, these people don't actually exist. Okay, I used a little script and I populated 200 users. So in my company of MakerVlog, I have 200 users. Okay, and at the minute, every single one of them can log in and access everything. Okay, there is no filtering here whatsoever. Everyone is in here. Everyone is part of the same group. This is really bad. Okay, and you'd be surprised how many companies actually do this. So there is things that you can do in here to try and sort this out. I'm not going to cover them in this video, but you know, this is something that will need fixed. This is one of the problems. So I mean, as you can see, let's say B Bogart has effectively the same level access as my account, and I have set up my own account as an IT account so that I have access to a couple of more administrative things. But there's no filtering. There's nothing in here that's actually checking and saying, okay, this group can do this group can do that. There's nothing in there. But this, as I say, is just the list of every single user that is in the company. It's messy. Usually you would have this in folders. You can see here on the left hand side you've got users. You would have another folder that says, okay, these people are, you know, they work in HR. So this is where all the HR people are. This is where all the IT people are. This is where all of the, you know, main office people are, etc. And you would have it segregated in that way because it makes it easier whenever you're trying to apply rules. Because let's face it, someone in HR does not need to access the same things as someone in IT, and vice versa. You don't want your regular, you know, workers, your users, to be able to access HR documents because there could be very sensitive information in there. And so that's how you start to apply rules to this. So it really, this is the bedrock. This is the foundation. You need to make sure that all of the users are segregated properly, and then you can start going in and starting to apply rules and things like that. Also in the DC, you'll have a list of computers. At the minute, you can see I've only got 2 in there because, you know, it's a small network. I don't have that many servers, and the Linux machines, they're awkward to join into the domain. Don't worry about that. Again, throwing jargon at you, you can ignore it. That's just for anyone who's technical out there. You know, have to keep them interested somehow. So this is the computers, and again, you would have these segregated as well, ideally. Now, usually not to the same degree, but you would have, say, servers in one folder. Then you would have like desktop computers of a certain office if you have multiple offices. Laptop users if you've got, you know, people who are maybe working remotely, and given current situation that's going on right now, that could be quite a lot of people. So you would have you know, your laptop users, remote users, stuff like that, separated out as well into computers, because there are certain rules that you can only apply to computers and not to users, and vice versa. So a lot of information there, don't worry about it, but that's the meat of the Active Directory, the AD, which is on the domain controller, and that's what controls all the users and stuff. I spoke there about rules, and this is another thing that's on the DC, and I'm hoping that you're starting to build up a picture of why this server is so important, because there's so much on it. There's so much on it, and if it goes down, it's not good. I had said there about applying rules, and you do that through this thing here called group policy. And if I go down into it, I don't have any group policy objects, I don't believe. Oh, I do. I did. I made a test one. So these little chunks here are policies, and in these you specify what people can and can't do effectively. So in here you can set up loads of different things. You can really restrict what the users can do, what they can access, what way files are mapped, things like that. So if you're in your company and you log on to your machine, and whenever you hop onto it, it's got a specific desktop background. You know, it's got, you know, the company logo and, you know, a smiling person in the corner who looks really happy to work there. That's done through group policy, usually. There are other tools out there, but for most people use group policy for these things. And whenever you log in, all your icons are there of all the tools and, you know, folders and files that you'd need. Again, it's done through group policy usually. So the thing with group policy is that I'd said before, the Active Directory is the bedrock. So if people aren't in the right groups and aren't in the right construction in the Active Directory, it can make your life very hard in group policy, because that's how you apply them. Whenever you make a policy and you say, okay, I want all of the HR machines to have a desktop background that says HR, and I want to take the little clock in the bottom left hand corner, I want to take that away because I don't want them to know what time it is, because I want them to work really late. You would be surprised some companies do that. And you make that group policy object and you apply it, but your Active Directory isn't correct. You know, you've got HR users that aren't in the right folder, they're somewhere else. It means that it's going to apply to some people, but not everyone. And in some cases that can be very dangerous, because if you've got something set up, say in permissions, where let's say you say, okay, only people in the HR group are allowed to access sensitive data, and then all of a sudden you've got HR people come to you saying, I can't access it, and you're trying to trawl through, trying to figure out what it is. This is when security falls down, because what happens is that IT person will be like, oh, for say I can't work this out, and will just either remove the permissions on that folder and say, I'll be all right, we'll just take it off, take off the permissions for now, let everyone access it, it's fine. No one knows that it's there. You'd have to find it to look for it. It'll be all right. Take it off, and then I'll fix it later, just to get the user up and running. It happens all the time, and it then never gets fixed. Okay, the IT person goes on, does something else, forgets about it, and then there's a hole, and then you've got people who are then able to access sensitive information that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise, and it can just fall down from someone not being in the right group in the AD. Okay, so again, very important server, and it's very important that your AD is correct.